Bow. Bow, bow, bow. Bow, 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 bow. This is going to get like 35 views. I'm at 4% battery. This video is not going to get any views. However, it's 1 o'clock in the morning after Better Call Saul's finale aired. Saul gone. What else are we going to talk about? So, the finale was good. That's reassuring. Gilligan Gold & Company understood the assignment at hand, which is ultimately the biggest praise I can give to this episode is that it was a Better Call Saul episode through and through. From Saul pulling shit in the negotiations to his courtroom antics to the subdued tension of the chase scene, this was not necessarily a greatest hits collection of what the series was trying to accomplish, but just one final coup de grace of some of the qualities that it tried to hone and improve over the years to just an extremely polished degree. It was a masterclass in engagement, not just from its flashbacks to where immediately you could tell what was going on, who was going to show up. Every scene, from him getting chased down to the surprise appearance by Marie Schrader to him possibly selling out Kim on the plane, every scene knew how to entice you. It started off with an immediate hook, and almost every single scene here, except the courtroom scene, which I'll get to in a bit, felt like must-watch, you can't look away for a microsecond television. Which, of course, is just, a testament to how good the writing has been on this show in Breaking Bad. If Breaking Bad is a series of catharsis, its final episode, Felina, is a series of cathartic events in which one man goes on an epic rampage of leaving no stone unturned in his life. He rights every wrong that he's ever suffered. He tries to correct every injustice he's ever incurred. Well, Better Call Saul, like the classic movies it so favorably talks about, has a much more bittersweet, softer tone to it. It is a show, whether we're talking about the past of the Better Call Saul Breaking Bad universe, whether it's calling back to what we know as the past, as everything that happened in the Breaking Bad world, or if it's calling back to Jimmy's past, and he's talking about things that happened to him when he was younger, when he was still forming this relationship with his brother. It is a show that's always looking back. It is a show always in regret, always considering what we're doing different, and while its ruminations are as explicit as I make them out to be, the past is never forgotten. Saul Gone feels so right because of how it plays with those two ideas. These flashbacks don't feel like fan service moments or callbacks, just cute ways to tie back the beginning to the end. They feel essential, like if Chuck and Mike and Walter were not in this episode, Saul Gone would almost feel incomplete considering the influence these three characters had on Saul's life. Saul himself, I love the motif of the time machine, because whether or not Saul Jimmy was a matter of nature versus nurture, what is highlighted above all else is how much regret Jimmy carries with him, how much he wonders about how things could have gone differently, what could have been on the other side, and whether or not that's immense wealth, and how he could have cheated the system in a better way to become an even more powerful version of Saul than what we see in Breaking Bad, or if it's, could I have become a much better person than I am today, be the upstanding lawyer Jimmy McGill that Chuck would have wanted him to. Regret is something that is inseparable from the character itself, and that brings us to the bittersweet moment to it, because in this one moment in the courtroom, he finally gets to put to rest all that regret, and in the jail he can finally feel okay about himself, and as people have been pointing out on YouTube, that he doesn't have to live in the shadow of Gene, constantly in fear of the law, constantly having to worry about people on his tail. He finally has found peace with himself, and for once in his life has done something he doesn't have to look back on with regret. My big issue with the courtroom scene is that it dramatically oversimplifies Saul and Jimmy's nature. We have a three-dimensional character wrapped up into one element. Jimmy has been hiding under Saul the entire time. He is culpable for every single action he's taken in his life. He says so in the courtroom. It was his fault, and now he is atoning for his sins. And for a series that for so long contemplates, ruminates on, has Chuck created Saul? In my opinion, absolutely yes. How much is Kim at fault in this? I think a considerable degree. It almost pins everything on Jimmy in the most simplistic of ways, and it's not as though the show could have avoided this. With how much nuance and complexities were getting tossed around season to season, whether or not all these different scenes showing different pieces of evidence, whether Jimmy is to blame, whether other people are to blame for making him this way, you could have never captured that in a final episode. You would have had to make it simpler. But I think when you have Saul ready to strangle an old woman and showing no inclination of that old Jimmy until he sees the look in her face, when that's the only peek we get into him yearning for him to be a better person, to be the Jimmy he used to be, that's just not very convincing. And the turn from Saul to Jimmy feels so sudden here that I can't say that that element was done well. But then you have Kim and Jimmy sharing a smoke, and him doing the finger guns, and the screen cutting to black when they're separated, and you think, wow, that was maybe a string of perfectly executed emotional moments. That's probably the most tear-jerker worthy moment of the entire year, TV or movies, that hits you the hardest, even though it's not something that you're going to be bawling your eyes over, still leaves you with that melancholic feeling that Better Call Saul occasionally just hits so damn well. And while it's totally, I think, correct to be disappointed in the fact that we're going to have to rely on video essayists to capture and summarize the breadth, all the nuances of Jimmy, because this episode largely undersells that, I think in the face of all the things the episode accomplishes, of being moment to moment, about as engaging as a product of television can get, from a thematic perspective, understanding and just not regurgitating, but using again in creative manners what Better Call Saul has done well for years, what it's been offering, without it feeling cheap. I think that you just have to just give yourself over to the episode as a whole, because it is great, despite its flaws. And yes, I do think it is flawed. It is not this perfect manifesto of the series, but I didn't really expect it to be. I think it accomplished exactly what it set out to do, and Gilligan Golden Company understood the task at hand. Make a series finale that stuck the landing and laid the series, the Heisenberg-verse, laid it to rest with dignity. And it absolutely did that, which is why this episode's like an 8.8. It's close to a 9. I think the amount of damage done to that whole McGill thing is frustrating, and why I'm keeping it under that. But overall, more than solid work from them. I'm going to bed now.